This is episode 596 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, starting off here, a little bit of a different story in the sense that it's kind of a obviously political issue. Changes happening in the New Mexico legislature, specifically the Republicans in the House, yet another leadership shift and change. Ryan Lane already having left the body before the end of his term. He was the House Minority Speaker. He has been replaced, and a kind of a new leadership team has been brought in. Rod Montoya, who's been in the legislature for a while, another Farmingtonian, is that how they call him?
That sounds right to me. Sounds right.
Farmingtonian. Ryan Lane, of course, being from Farmington, the Four Corners. Rod Montoya, the new minority leader, also from Farmington. He and Gail Armstrong were in a pitched battle for that particular position. Whereas we have new leaders in the other House positions, Alan Martinez from Bernalillo County, minority whip, and Gail Armstrong staying put in her role as caucus chair. So the big news, of course, is the Republicans with new House leadership. I think it is safe to say that Montoya and Lane, while representing the same general geographical area, are very different in their approaches to the game of politics. I will say it's Lane is maybe a kinder, gentler approach. Got the ponytail. He's a little more kind of the new age Republican. Montoya,
the
definitely
hipster Republican.
The hipster Republican, yeah. Rod is definitely more of the traditional conservative, and I don't know that I hope Rod doesn't get upset at this, but I would call him more of the pit bull style, kind of hard charging and dedicated conservative, pretty much across the board. Somebody who is going to mix it up a little bit in Santa Fe, and obviously, all of this really is important based on the members of the legislature that are elected this fall. We will possibly see a special session at some point. The governor's back to saying it's an 80% deal. I don't know if that is the case or not, or if she's blowing hot air, just wants to keep everybody on her toes.
Yeah.
But anyway, thoughts on the Republican leadership shift?
Well, a couple of things. I do think policy-wise, Lane and Montoya probably not that far apart.
No.
I do think the style thing is big, but the other issue, particularly it used to be in the Senate and now it's in the House, is there are not a lot of Republicans left, and so in terms of passing controversial legislation, almost not possible from the Republican side right now in Santa Fe, and even killing horrible things getting to be more difficult. So it's one of those, we'll see what the count is, what the numbers are after the elections play themselves out this fall. But it is not easy to make your legislative will happen right now for Republicans in Santa Fe. And then I just do want to say that Ryan Lane has already been replaced. He resigned, not at the end of his term, but he resigned early, and they did appoint Bill Hall, who is retired law enforcement, both having worked at San Juan County, I believe in the Sheriff's Department, a retired FBI agent. So he'll be the new representative up there. So in terms of there will be a Republican in the fall in that, because he has no opponent. But again, a lot of Democrats, and we'll see what happens with the election. And wish Mr. Montoya and the rest of the Republicans good luck from a policy point of view, no matter what happens.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that in order for this to matter, the Republicans need, ballpark 4, 5 new faces up there, new districts. The numbers need to be a little more even. Obviously, Ryan Lane was there for the honeymoon phase of Javier Martinez. I consider that honeymoon phase to have come to an end where on the paid family leave, and Martinez is a true hardcore left-wing progressive. He is the Speaker of the House. Lane and him, I think in the first session, the 60-day, had a little bit of a meeting of the minds and were able to kind of smooth over the vast policy gulf between the two of them. Then, when it came to the paid family leave, Javier Martinez kind of resorted to the old try the politics approach and pushed the bill through without the committee that killed it last time around. Fortunately, the bill ultimately died on the House floor, but I think that was kind of a shot over the bow. So let's just say that the Javier Martinez that Rod Montoya is going to be dealing with will have a 2-session period as Speaker under his belt, and may have been shedding his Mr. Nice Guy approach to the extent that there was such an approach there.
Yeah, and then the other issue, Paul, is that there, and a good example is the paid family sick leave. There were some members of the legislature on the Democratic side that went against that legislation, and there's a pretty big effort to get rid of most of those. So in addition to the number of Republicans, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the number of Democrats who, I don't know if you call them moderate. In today's world, that means something a little different than it did 5-10 years ago. But we'll see if they're even more progressives in Santa Fe. That could be an issue as well.
Please don't make me have nightmares, Wally.
All right, I will try. I will try.
A more progressive legislature would be a true nightmare, not just for me, but for, I think, everybody around the state of New Mexico who actually cares about the future of this state. So we'll just block that comment from the record. Anyway, so moving forward, and speaking of so-called progressive policy here, the great economist Milton Friedman once said that if you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert in 5 years, there'd be a shortage of sand. I wrote a recent post at airsoфenchantment.com in this theme, noting the sorry condition of I-40. Now, there's always this kind of libertarian angels on the head of a pen argument about how a private sector transportation network would work. I think that the longer we see deteriorating conditions along I-40, the more plausible such a free market transportation network becomes, because the state government in cahoots, in combination with the federal government, has done a terrible job of maintaining I-40, which happens to be one of, if not the most important transportation corridors in the entire country. I think it's safe to say that there's a great deal of freight that goes along I-40, which of course traverses the entire width of New Mexico. A report from the state notes that at 373 miles in length, and the road goes all the way across New Mexico, I-40 is in a state of disrepair. Multiple deficiencies, immediate needs, pavement deteriorating rapidly, dangerously short on-ramps, high rates of crashes, and there is no easy fix. There's 118 curve deficiencies, problems with areas where the road curves, and bridges in disrepair. So it's a serious issue for a very important corridor. You would think that this might be a top priority for government, both state and federal. Instead, what we get is the state of New Mexico has applied for a grant for $250 million from the federal government to establish clean transportation fueling centers along I-40. electric charging stations and mobile hydrogen fueling stations would be available at these facilities, one near Albuquerque, one near Gallup, and one in Tucumcari. So setting aside the fact that we're talking about $250 million for three lousy, essentially gas stations, refueling stations, that's a boatload of cash. But the idea that this is the top priority when the most important corridor, transportation corridor, certainly in the state of New Mexico, is in horrible disrepair. And I don't know about you, Wally, but I've driven that road out to the west, to the state line. And yeah, I can vouch that I-40 is one of many roads in New Mexico in a state of deep disrepair. And it's just incredible with all the oil and gas money, with all the different priorities that we spend money on as a state and as a national government, that this is not the thing. But that's kind of par for the course. That's the way government priorities are. They always want to buy off the latest special interest group or political ally. Maintaining a road, you don't really get the hoopla and the fanfare for that.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Paul. And, I would say it's certainly the I-40 corridor is not only important to New Mexico, it's important to the entire country. A lot of things are made in California, despite their policies there, and move to the middle of the country and vice versa. And yes, it is horrible. It's bad. And it's not the only road that's bad as well. I go up to the Farmington area many times a year, and that road is getting to be downright dangerous. There are places where there's dips in the pavement where, if even if you're going the speed limit, it's like you better have good suspension because you're going to be in danger of lifting off. But I-40, on the other hand, is turning into a just hundreds of miles of ruts and potholes. And here's a little hint. It doesn't matter whether your truck is a battery powered truck or a diesel powered truck or gasoline powered. Roads like that are very hard on equipment. They cause blowouts, they hurt tires, they damage equipment. And yeah, it seems like in a state like New Mexico, we are flush with money, but we certainly, it's interesting. The Infrastructure Act coming out of the feds, that infrastructure used to mean things like roads. That's all in bridges. It seems like that got kind of short shifted this time, and we're certainly feeling it here in New Mexico. Having said that, there are places that are nice. I-40, they've done a decent job keeping that up to speed here in the city of Albuquerque. But I'm with you. You do not want to get, on the other side of the Sandias out there and not have your car and your tires be in good condition, because that's a punishing ride right now.
Yeah, it's definitely something, we at the Rio Grande Foundation expect so little of government because we understand that government's priorities are not our priorities. This is, it's a great example of encapsulating our dim view of what government can and will do because they just don't have the incentives to do it politically. So it's something that we're going to highlight. Channel 13, to their credit, has highlighted this to a significant degree, but yeah, to the extent government does anything, this should be at the very top of their list. Again, happy to make the case. Maybe someday we'll have a guest on Tipping Point, New Mexico, to talk about what the road privatization would look like. In Europe, they kind of do a little bit of this. You definitely have a lot of toll roads in Europe because they don't. They'd use the gas tax revenue for their other social welfare programs. Our gas tax, much lower, actually is largely spent on transportation. A lot of it gets diverted to mass transit, separate issue. Then there's Davis-Bacon, then there's permitting. We could get a lot more transportation money from even a lousy federal government and state government. But this, maybe Bob Poole from Reason. He's a very knowledgeable guy when it comes to transportation issues.
Yeah, and one other issue that we are in the midst of a kind of a cluster transition to forced electric vehicles in our country, and places like New Mexico and the feds largely. Electric vehicles don't pay gas taxes because that's right, they don't use gas, and so as we move there, you're going to have lower supplies of money potentially unless that issue is addressed. And there's a lot of proposals for that. Nobody likes any of them, and politically, they all have some problems. Certainly, the technology exists. You do the smart pass sort of thing for toll roads, like the one that in Denver, and something like that, where you could be charged instead of at the pump or at the plug, you could be charged based on the miles that you drive. But this is an issue that is just the roads are continually kicked down. The can is continually kicked down the road, and all I want to say is, to reiterate what you said about government. It's government is like a romantic relationship, Paul. The key for a happy one is low expectations, and so we definitely have that. And so, but here's the thing: we used to expect the roads to be better than they are now. It's one of those. This seems like, in my recent memory, overall across the state, this seems like it's the worst it's ever been, and so. That may or may not be accurate. Memories are sometimes faulty when you go back, but they're certainly bad right now. And we need a blue ribbon panel to study this issue.
Well, maybe a relationships expert is the next guest we need to have on after Bob Poole from Reason. He's the transportation guy, but I don't know, maybe Dr. Phil or Oprah will. We could really hit the big time with some relationship advice. All right. A lot of EV related items here coming up, as there has been a fair amount of news. First and foremost, the auto dealers attempted to get the various boards, the EIB and the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Air Quality Board, to essentially put a hold on their EV mandates. I'm not surprised that they did not go for it, just given that these are political appointees who never have to stand before the voters. It is the way of the world. If you want to do something truly egregious, get an unelected body to do it. So maybe it's a pledge. We need to no unelected bodies supported by any candidates, or that might be something worth doing. But anyway, of course, EV mandate in question is for 43% of new vehicles sold in New Mexico to be electric starting in the summer of 2026, which, for those of you who have calendars and date planners, know that we're talking just a little over 2 years from now. Just keep in the back of your head when you start hearing commercials or seeing commercials for model year 2025 vehicles this summer. And that is when those vehicles start getting rolled out, that is when the 43% requirement kicks in. I went ahead and looked up information from Autos Innovate, autosinnovate.org. They do the best tracking I could find, which is from third quarter of 2023, showing that the percentage of electric vehicles sold in New Mexico was 4.82%, meaning that essentially within the next 2+ years, New Mexico will have to 10x, multiply by 10 the percentage of electric vehicles sold in New Mexico. Since we always do this, it's no surprise to anybody that 26% of vehicles sold in California are electric. Still doesn't get you to 43%, but they're at least plausibly close.
But that's a good point. It's like right now, the state that has amongst the highest market penetration, California, is they're still a long way away. So
they are. District of Columbia, 19.36%. followed by Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and so on and so forth. In terms of the least adoptive states, state that much more resembles New Mexico from a geographical perspective, North Dakota, 1.32%. I would not want to be stranded on the prairies of North Dakota in an electric vehicle during a winter storm up there. Mississippi, West Virginia, Louisiana, Wyoming, South Dakota, some of the other states. And obviously there's both political as well as geographical considerations to be
Yeah.
had there. But
Large geographies and low population densities without charging stations does not make for a rapid adoption rate. That's for sure.
exactly. So the simple point is that the entities that would be able to or willing to pull back on this, at least initially, have chosen to stay the course. That's not a surprise because this looks like the kind of issue that will not be a crisis until the crisis is staring you in the face and you're at June of 2027 or 2026 and the new model year has begun and people are just not buying those EVs at the 43% level.
Yeah, Paul, it'll be very interesting. The odds of this changing prior to that are, given what just happened, are exceedingly low. And so are we going to see begrudging compliance with our government overlords, or are we going to have the auto summer of discontent here in a couple years? That will be an interesting one. So, the car dealers were maybe not. Well, the other issue is on this is that legislation could do this, because here's the thing: it's like this rulemaking process, the legislation that they use to make specific rules like this is tenuous at best, and so the legislature could fix this as well. And so it'll be interesting to see what kind of issue this is, and as you say, the timing of it will be very important.
On the EV topic, Michelle Lujan Grisham and some of her environmental allies, they're also, not surprisingly, not backing away. They had an event last week, including Jim Desjardins. He is the executive director of the Renewable Energy Industries Association, so a special interest group supporting these policies. The basic point of the gathering was to tout all of the federal funds that are flowing into New Mexico and, of course, other states. $100 million for EV charging, $20 billion being distributed by EPA for renewable energy initiatives. Broadly speaking, of course, EV is very much a part of that. Inflation Reduction Act will provide $369 billion for states, and how New Mexico can get in on some of that cash for its own EV efforts. But I think the upshot here is that I wrote this and said, Desjardins said that the transition is going to happen. We need to plan for it. We need to take advantage of it. We need to do everything we can to make it be done as best as possible for the state of New Mexico. And that's kind of the 1-2 punch of a lot of environmentalists these days, is that it is going to happen, but we have to subsidize and mandate it at every turn in order to force it down your throat. So I won't say there's a lot of other things in this world that are kind of like this. I guess the theory is medicine. When you're a kid, the idea of do you want this the easy way or the hard way? This distasteful cough medicine or whatever. But of course, the medicine actually makes you feel better at the end. These mandates and these subsidies will only cause additional problems, not just talking environmentally speaking, but ultimately they'll cause problems for consumers, for the state of New Mexico, for the nation as a whole. So anyway, but the final analysis is the governor has bought into this 100%. She is not going to back down until it is impossible for her not to back down.
And Paul, I've talked about this from time to time. I first noticed it, as I've said, in the Obama administration, is there's these aspirational goals that are set that everyone knows they won't be achieved, that they're not realistic, but they don't back them away until the real pain is starting to be felt. And I do think that that's likely now. Regarding the transition to different forms of energy, there's no doubt that that is going on, but there are a couple of things that are really problematic right now, and that is the amount of batteries that would be necessary to do that. That's a challenge. Although in the short term, no one wants electric vehicles, or the demand is way down, so there's more batteries. But those also seem to be needed for the electric system, because the only way that wind and solar work is to have a way to store energy for when those two sources are, the proverbial wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. But charging stations is the other one. It's like the more EVs there are, boy, that's going to get to be a problem real soon. And then on the electric grid side, there are some things in the government programs for, say, carbon capture for existing power plants that would allow some of those to stay on to stabilize things that have an opportunity. And then the environmental groups have been fighting those tooth and nail, even though they are in the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Act, and other things that happened before then. But this we are in for a pretty volatile period, no matter what happens, because the goals have been set, and until we start to see what breaks first, it doesn't seem like it's like a game of chicken, two cars driving at each other, and neither side seems willing to turn away at this point. We'll see what happens, but it does seem like the next 2-3 years are going to a lot of things are likely to make themselves evident in terms of where the shortcomings are in their plan.
Yeah, and those batteries. You hear all these stories about how cost effective wind and solar are. Well, that is simply not the case. And of course, the battery backup is a critical component of that, not to mention the utility lines and other factors that need to be considered. But the eclipse yesterday, of course, reminds me that, there are random events, weather being the most noteworthy, but the eclipse definitely put a damper on solar panels for a considerable part of yesterday, even here in New Mexico, where the eclipse was not at totality. So it's just building your economy around a source of energy that is intermittent and very much non-dense or lacking in density is a huge, huge mistake. But we're
Yeah,
going to continue.
and not to put our viewers and listeners to sleep, but if you use say solar energy while the sun's up, and you can use it at that time, and you have it's absolutely low cost. There's no question about it. Wind very similar, but we're seeing increasingly what happens is when there's problems with existing power plants, and make no mistake, natural gas is the primary source of energy in our country. But when you get a few natural gas plants down, and you get an event that keeps wind and solar from coming online, we're seeing this period of when everything's working well of low cost go astronomically high. And so the volatility is one of those things that, again, has yet to be addressed, because it's only happened a handful of times in a big way. But if, that gets to be a weekly or monthly thing, believe me, solutions will be called for. But we're going to break it first, and then we'll fix it. So we'll see what happens.
And finally, on the EV rundown here, we've kind of not been talking as much about EVs, but this last week there was just a lot of news relating to them. Specifically, Tesla encountered some, just say, turbulence. We don't normally talk about individual stocks or individual corporations, but when you think electric vehicles and probably the apex of the quality and visibility of the electric vehicles made by Tesla, you really, that's what comes to mind. And according to Yahoo Finance, Tesla saw its first ever year-over-year drop in sales, with the exception of the early days of the pandemic, when, of course, for a variety of other reasons, the number of cars sold and Teslas sold dropped precipitously. But this is their first true year-over-year drop, and that highlights the fact that there's concerns about diminished demand for electric vehicles. Furthermore, according to CNN, General Motors reported that its U.S. EV sales fell 22% in the quarter compared to a year earlier. Finally, Tesla's canceled the long-promised inexpensive car that investors have been counting on to drive its growth into a mass-market automaker. According to 3 sources familiar with the matter, the reversal comes as Tesla faces fierce competition globally from Chinese electric vehicle makers, flooding the market with cars priced as low as $10,000. And I think this is truly an interesting issue to discuss. And I would love to be a fly on the wall at UAW headquarters to see if they are concerned about the Chinese proliferation of vehicles, electric vehicles made in that nation. And as bad as TikTok may be, I'm wondering how bad it'll be if we're all driving Chinese-made electric vehicles in the not too distant future, Wally. But a lot to unpack there, I understand.
Well, yeah, well, and the key is the UAW concern. Boy, if they're not paying attention. I have a feeling they are. There's also talk I saw where Janet Yellen was contemplating maybe a tariff on these cheap imports from China.
As was Trump.
Yeah,
Trump said it.
No question about it. And then the key is why are they cheap in China? Their labor standards, their economy, their ability to have certain industries subsidized, and believe me, and I certainly don't know to what extent that happens, but guess what? Neither does anybody else, because if you trust economic data coming out of China, I have got some swampland to sell you in Florida. So, it's very tough to know exactly what's going on, but odds are that is an issue that, again, and this will all come, it seems like everything's going to come together in 2026. So,
yeah, well, China also has direct access to a lot of these rare earth minerals and cobalt and other items that are essential for the manufacture of these batteries. And, they could easily...
That are produced in the most environmentally friendly, highest standard way, right?
If there's one thing that I trust about the Chinese government, it is that they are obeying all of the most up-to-date environmental rules and regulations as they manufacture their electric vehicles and attempt to take over the U.S. automobile industry, because there'd be no geopolitical power dynamic at play there. It'd be strictly because of free market principles. And while I am a avowed free trader, if you're not at least concerned and treating China a little bit differently than a pure free market actor, I think you're, quite frankly, insane. So, something to definitely be concerned about. And of course, we could have, at least TikTok has taken over in a market-driven way. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's a conversation that Congress is having at this very moment. Whereas China is ultimately being incentivized and subsidized, not just by the Chinese government, but the U.S. government to get into the U.S. auto industry. And they won't, despite their communist background, to the extent that they do bring production over here to the United States, maybe they will, maybe they won't. I suspect they're not going to be super interested in unionization. So I think the UAW needs to get their head out of the sand.
Well, yeah, and that's happened for other car makers, both Japanese, Korean, to name a few. Some of the European brands have brought their production to the United States, and believe me, it is in right to work states and is much less likely to be unionized, and I won't say none, but not many of those plants that have been built in the South are union.
Exactly. All right. Wallethub has a new report. New Mexico, 30th heaviest tax burden among U.S. states. That is by looking at only taxes paid by residents of the state, property taxes, individual income tax, and sales tax. All of those three amount to, we're in 30th position, which, normally we're dead last or we're number one, depending on the bad or good. We are 44th when you talk about property tax burdens. We are 40th income tax, and we have fourth, highest. So you want the lower number in terms of the tax burden. Now, of course, New Mexico could be a close to zero tax state, a la Alaska, which is the lowest tax burden, no income tax, no sales tax. You got to do something to get people to live up in the frozen tundra of Alaska. New Hampshire, another state with neither tax, very, very low tax overall states. Wyoming, Florida, a lot of states with no personal income tax. Tennessee, Delaware, no sales tax. South Dakota, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Nevada. In terms of top highest tax states, New York, Hawaii, Vermont, Maine, California, Connecticut, Minnesota, Illinois, and New Jersey. So a lot of blue states, people are leaving. They really don't like having large amounts of their incomes taken from them. No surprise there. New Mexico, of course, we have this opportunity to really reduce our tax burden, as well as to address the way the gross receipts tax isn't just a sales tax. It's actually a tax on small business, and really do something about that, because that is the fourth highest. That puts us in a very high category when it comes to our taxes on sales and excise. And of course, that's not fully appreciated by these kind of national reports that can't kind of pigeonhole our gross receipts tax in the overall tax structure. But suffice it to say that with the money flowing in from oil and gas, which is not even factored into this report, New Mexico could be much, much better off than it is.
There's no doubt about that, Paula. But one of the things that I think New Mexico struggles with is just it's just a different view of the world. If you're a free market, a libertarian, a small government type, you view taxes as a necessary evil, whereas it seems like the big government types, whether it be in the Democrat or the Republican Party, and certainly the progressives, almost view taxes as an inherent positive good for some reason, because it takes money out of the free market and puts it into the government system. And so I think that's kind of New Mexico's issue right now. I don't think many New Mexico politicians can even imagine a world, without taxes, because what are they going to talk about in Santa Fe? Maybe efficient government? I don't know, but it is an issue. And New Mexico, as you say, we're in a position where we could do an awful lot of good. And the sad truth of it is that it's the tax structure. It's one of the big three, I think, that are necessary to diversify the economy of the state. But it's certainly within the grasp from a fiscal point of view with the money we have right now, and then figure out something about crime and education. And guess what? We would have a diversified economy and be a well-functioning, one of the best states on any Wallethub survey that they do.
Yeah. Are we, going to solve all of New Mexico's problems with dramatically lower tax burden? Not necessarily, and it's not going to happen overnight necessarily, although I think you'd see an immediate, as we did during the Richardson years when he cut the income tax and the capital gains tax, we would see some obvious signs of economic progress. But when you have the ability to leverage those dollars, you should be using them in a positive direction. And we really haven't done anything of substance with that that resource available to us. Speaking of crime, and there's a lot to unpack here, but suffice it to say that when Chief Harold Medina of the Albuquerque Police Department got into a crash at an intersection here in Albuquerque that was caused by some people on the road, homeless or not. Somebody fired a gun. Medina clearly seems to have panicked, driven his car forward in against a red light in an intersection, and crashed into a classic Mustang vehicle. The driver thankfully survived, but is facing a long road to recovery and had some serious injuries. You know, this is a progressive left-wing governed city, from the mayor still to the city council. Largely, it's a very split city council, but you would think that these people who were marching, just a few short years ago and demanding not just accountability for the police, but defunding of the police, and have theoretically supported accountability for the cops for years, voted on a 5-4 basis at city council, with the conservatives supporting a independent body, either the state police or Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office, to investigate what exactly happened with the police chief and this accident and the reaction to it. Instead, the progressives said no to that kind of reporting and investigation, and they were joined by one counselor who's typically more to the right, Brooke Bassan. So unfortunately, it was a 5-4 vote. This has made national attention headlines, including a very well-written article that I posted at Heirs of Enchantment by Jacob Sullum of Reason. And, remember, this is, we paid tens of millions of dollars to James Ginger to monitor reforms at APD. Police accountability should always be a top consideration because it factors into crime. Arguably the DOJ has done more to increase crime in the city of Albuquerque than any other single thing, although I would say Keller's leadership is a close second, maybe even first. But the fact that this is not even being investigated outside of APD is frustrating and troubling, and it just shows the hypocrisy, I think, when it comes to police accountability among certain ideologies.
Well, Paul, for me, this story falls under the category as fact is stranger than fiction. To have a high crime city that's struggling with all these issues, and then to have the police chief, basically speed away from trouble and get in an accident that's not investigated. If you put that in a Grisham novel, it would sell 4 copies. But that's
not a Lujan Grisham
novel.
No,
that's John Grisham.
For those of too young to remember, John Grisham was huge in the 90s.
He was huge, but it's crazy, and it's one of those. I don't know, because here's the thing: we don't know the facts because we don't have an independent investigation of this thing. But my take on it is, based on what I've seen, and this is subject to a real investigation, is, did he do wrong? Yeah, he broke the law, but he was afraid. Guess what? When gunshots ring out, people are afraid. And so does this need to be the end of his career? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but I don't think it does. It's one of those, he's like most Albuquerqueans. When the gunshots go off, you duck and cover, and he just did what almost anyone would do. But to not have an investigation, that is the issue. As they say, used to say in Washington, although we don't say that much anymore, the cover-up is more important than the act, and that's what this one's reminding me of.
Yeah, and a lot of his reactions were human, and maybe they weren't perfect. Maybe it's something that some accountability needs to be brought forth upon him for that. But I agree. I don't think this is like something that, at least initially, I would have said, oh, Medina needs to go. I mean, there are other scandals at APD, the DWI scandal among them, but in a police department that is so struggling with its own accountability on both sides of the equation, both in terms of treating suspected perps, et cetera, and the human rights side of things, but also on the crime fighting side of things, and just flat out corruption, it would seem at the very least that this would be worth studying and reporting on. And of course, this is a progressive governed city. This is a city governed by Mayor Tim Keller, who I think a lot of police on the beat are frustrated with his so-called leadership, and you would think that this kind of investigation would be the very least they could do. Real quickly, RGF is hosting its first official luncheon of 2024 on April 22nd. We are hosting Larry Schweikert. He has written a new book. He's written a number of other books, but his current book is Patriots' History of Globalism, Its Rise and Decline. If you're interested in how Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and others affect some of these international institutions that govern us through the UN and WHO, et cetera. This is the kind of thing that you will, I think, find informational. Schweikert's written The Patriots' History of the United States and other prominent best-selling books. He has a sympathetic, and not everybody takes a position on President Trump in one way or the other, but I would say Schweikert is a Trumpier than average conservative author. So somebody who very entertaining speaker, and somebody who definitely worth checking out. April 22nd, Indian Pueblo Cultural Center here in Albuquerque, and also down in Roswell at the Liberty, which is a great place to be. So Monday the 22nd.
Yeah, and Schweikert, he is a prolific author, a writer of thick books, but he is also an excellent speaker. So I think that it would be a fantastic event, whether Albuquerque or Roswell.
All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.